let's just take a few minutes to get our minds into neutral. And then let's set our motivation for our time together. And I always say that to the extent that you can tap into the highest motivation, that wish to develop renunciation, bodhicitta, wisdom, the wish to become enlightened, to be able to help every living being. And then I think you guys are okay with starting with a refuge prayer. It's really so appropriate. You set the motivation and then go for refuge, because you know that's what can actually help. The Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are those things that can help us to achieve all the realizations on the path. And I'll do the first time in English. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By practicing giving and other perfections, may I attain the state of a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. Sangye chodam sukhi chodam la, changchu badu dagni gyatsu chi, dagi jinso gibe sonangi, jola benje sangye upasho. Sangye chodam sukhi chodam la, Jangchu Badu Dagi Gyatsu Chi, Dagi Jinso Gipe Sonangu, Jola Pinche Sangye Drupa Shu. So on a related note, you may or may not, and I haven't paid close attention to how maybe some of the other instructors are doing refuge, or whether or not they're doing it consistently at the beginning of classes. But I chose to do the traditional refuge prayer, which says, giving, practicing giving, and the other perfections. But it's actually typically when you're at a teaching, instead of saying jinsok, that means, the practicing and giving, you would say Qian Yan. So by listening to the teachings, or if you're teaching, by giving the teachings, may I attain the state of a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. So just a little tweak. And I think, if you have prayer books, you probably have seen that, but I thought I'd just take the time to let you know, so that if you're going for refuge mentally or whatever, you can kind of really make that connection between the activity that we're doing and dedicating that even up front, setting the motivation and dedicating that as a cause. So last week we did a Tonglen practice with ourselves as the object, And I'm curious, not to put you guys on the spot, but I don't know if you did it again at all during the week, or if if you gave it any thought during the week, what that was like, or even just what it was like last week when we went through that. I always want to make sure that there's space to maybe just check in and chat about maybe anything that came up or what your thoughts were around, just the practice itself or the value of it or anything. Now, I'll be quiet from you. And no pressure either.
I like doing Tonglen. I've been doing Tonglen forever. I mean, actually, I was doing a form of Tonglen. Retrospectively, I think of it as a form of Tonglen before I ever practiced Buddhism.
Nice.
And I used to always tell my kids, oh, there's an ambulance going by. Now we pray for the drivers. We pray for the people they're going to help. We pray for the people they're helping. We pray for anybody who sees the accident. And so you just keep expanding that out and out and out, right? And it was, but I mean, if it was a Christian prayer that we did with it, instead of more just saying, hey, what do I need and how can I give that out and share? I like that a lot. And for me, Tonglen is always part of the 8 verses of mind training and the whole Lojong, and I've been doing more of that recently as well.
Yeah. When I used to live in Austin, and I kind of led, I guess, a center there. Whenever I would invite teachers to come, I would always ask them to teach on the Lojong practices because I feel like they're so incredibly helpful. And Tonglen, just the heart of it, just feels right. And I think I always end like, this is who you're meant to be, because at least for me, it really feels that way. When you're connected to that and doing that. And I think whether it's a Christian prayer, I think, it's sort of non-denominational, like just a great equalizing, heart opening, and it feels true. Like that's who we should be in the world. That's like our best self when we're in that state of mind, I think. I'm curious, had you ever like used yourself as an object? Like, have you ever applied it to you?
If you mean, I'm not sure how you're asking that question. If you mean, do I think, okay, so last week I fell off a ladder, I hurt my back, and I don't have a very good back anyway. And so if you mean, okay, great, so I'm sitting here and I'm feeling pain. Great, let's feel that pain. What do I need to give relief? Now let's start thinking about other people who have this pain because I'm still able to get up and walk and function, right? What about all the people who have back pain who can't function relatively normally? What about the people who have back pain who can't function at all? Absolutely. I mean, so if that's what you mean as the object, then yes. If also if you mean it as because yes, I mean, so to me, if I think, what do I need for equanimity here? I absolutely think, I absolutely try, and I won't say all the time, but as often as I can remember, which is probably half the time, I remember to offer that to myself first.
Nice. And that's probably, I think, yeah, I think that's probably that is more what I meant, really, like kind of applying that same compassion to yourself, because you did what I think is a tendency to do, which I do as well, which is immediately jumping to my back hurts, but other people have this pain and worse, right? And sometimes that's wonderful, and that's part of what we're here to be practicing, and that's part of an important part of the path. But if we're just really kind of skipping over ourselves, or if we find ourselves moving immediately to the pain of someone else, then I think it's worth just a pause to like really examine whether or not we have compassion for ourselves. And maybe we do. But if we don't, then I think it's like really the place to start.
But can't I have compassion for myself and still say, dude, suck it up, get your butt off the ground, deal with it, and offer it to others. I think I hear from people all the time about how that's not and I don't view that as I'm not being mean to myself. I don't wish myself bad things. I certainly want my back to be better, right? I certainly think, okay, long before you leaned over off the ladder and said, and you said you shouldn't do this, and then you did it anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, right. And so, yes, it was something, it didn't even take long for the karma to come to fruition, because I recognized right away that I shouldn't do this. And as soon as I recognized I shouldn't do it, I did it, and boom, I'm on the ground. But to me, I don't know that I'm necessarily not being compassionate to myself, just because I can say, great, yes, it hurts.
Yes.
What you need is relief, and let's offer that for other people. And then when I'm done, now get your butt up off the ground and get back to work.
I'm sort of laughing inside as you're saying that, because I mean, I feel like I do have compassion for myself. Sometimes I need to have a little more. But there's times when I'm talking to a friend and I'm just sort of looking at myself. I'm examining myself, and I'm examining often, what feels like selfishness. And then I'll get the like, don't beat yourself up, which is what we should do for each other. Like, don't beat yourself up. But then I think I'm not really beating myself up. I'm just sort of aware, and it's more useful. I think that thing of like, now pick yourself up and move forward. And so the reason that I kind of chose to talk about that last week, and the reason I'm maybe potentially belaboring it to an audience that's not needing to hear it, but I think that I have known people that really are not compassionate or gentle with themselves, and they really just do sort of like a lip service, and then they are at the same time very genuinely trying to cultivate compassion and love for others. And I said it last week, and I think it's really true, that if we can't, I don't even like to say the word forgive, because forgive implies some kind of a judgment. That to me, it's just understanding, having gentle compassion for ourselves. And that's how I think of it with other people too. It's not about forgiving, it's about having understanding, gentle understanding, and maybe that's just semantics and not worth teasing out. But for me, it always feels kind of worthwhile to really look at it. And like I said, I've known people who are they don't have that self-love and self-care. And I think you're always going to struggle in opening up your heart to others if you really haven't kind of done whatever you need to do to love yourself.
I agree wholeheartedly. And for me, it's not so much about whether I can be compassionate for myself. It's always, and maybe this is delusional of me, right? I said something. I said
pretty
something.
Good chance we're always got a little of that going on.
And she said, "Well, that's because that's not really what you wanted, is it?" And I've been saying that same thing for 20 years, and nobody's ever. And I really thought it was true, and she said, that wasn't really true, was it? And I had to think, oh my God, it wasn't, right? And so for me, it's about the jumping quickly is not about thinking that I'm not okay and I'm not deserving of it, because I do believe I am, but to not fall into, to take the next step, which is to fall into the self-pity. Oh, poor me, yes. I'm here. And now, so for me, if I am quick with myself, I can have compassion for other people. For me, when I start to have self-pity, makes it much more difficult for me to exhibit compassion for others.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting that you say it and even couch it in those terms, because you're right. I think on the diluted side, it becomes self-pity, right? And so when we're talking about compassion, that's never, it's not self-pity, and it really isn't pity on others either, right? It is what you said, which is, wow, they have this suffering. I wish that they didn't have to have that suffering. I wish I could do something about it. I'd like to give them what makes them happy. Everyone deserves happiness. It is that, and it is like a quick, it can be a quick jump. Sometimes we have to spend a little more time, right? And it's like, if you are struggling with someone and having, the warm fuzzy, there's certain people that are really easy to practice compassion with, right? They're the people who are compassionate, and it's easy. But then we have, sometimes people that are much more challenging. So, being a former police officer, I'm sure you saw both extremes with regularity. Those people that are so easy to have compassion for, and like, oh, this thing is happening to them, and really easily having that wish for their happiness, and wish to take away their suffering. And conversely, I'm sure there were a lot of instances where it looks like someone doesn't even deserve compassion, right? Or intellectually, I think when we sit for a minute, we can always hopefully we can always cultivate some empathy and compassion. But sometimes in the immediate face of something, it can be really challenging. It's like we have to apply our minds to developing it for some people, right? Because it may look like they're doing something that, doesn't look like it. They're doing something that's really harmful and harming others. And then, but they also deserve compassion, and the same compassion. And a case could be made that they need it more, right? As they're doing those things that are outwardly harming others. And this is where having some idea of karma can be so helpful. It's not that the people who are being harmed deserve it. It's not that, but it's like causes and conditions have ripened, and we've all had all kinds of these things happening to us before, and this is ripening. But then that's a done thing for them. But for the person who's inflicting some harm, they are setting something up. They are creating something that, if you believe in the laws of karma, what they're going to get is going to just be exponentially worse than the thing that they've done, right? So they're going to be receiving something really horrendous. So yeah, it's a, compassion towards ourselves, towards all other living beings. And what that looks like sometimes are the easy ones, and other times the hard one. Did you want to say something?
Yes, but I have a barking dog and a barking grandson in the background.
It's okay, but you don't have to. But yeah.
So yes, the only way I made it through was by remembering that. Well, first of all, we as humans are not kind to one another. We are not nice to each other. And so, but remembering that, kind of like the second face down on Chenrezig, sometimes you need to use a little bit of, give a little bit of the stick.
Yeah,
to
wrap
people in a direction.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to be wrathful as parents, as teachers, as even as Dharma teachers, right? There's different modes there's modes of the Lama, right? So, one of the modes, so literally there are 4 modes for a teacher that a teacher has to manifest as to help students, right? The first 2, I think, are, whether or not they're easy, I won't say, but generosity, right? And so to be giving and to be compassionate, but that's kind of easy. Gentleness and compassion and generosity, those are things that, at least on the, it feels like that we're not acting out of our own interest, right? But when it comes to like the other modes being wrathful and controlling, I think there we just have to be very clear about what our own motivations are. Like if we don't want to create, if we don't want to continue a negative karmic cycle, right? So you may have to be wrathful and do an action that, you know, may even externally look harming, right? But if on the inside, if we can manage to do that, and it's not easy, right? This is why, I mean, it's why I'm here. This is, I think, why you guys are here. Some of this stuff just is not easy. If it was, we'd already be enlightened, right? But checking our motivation, like how can I do what appears to be the correct, like the most helpful action? It looks like it's something that's wrathful. Externally may look like the same kind of thing that a person who's feeling a bunch of anger would do, right? Can I do that without the anger? Can I do that without cultivating hatred? And you know, honestly, sometimes it's like initially, maybe that's the mode, and then we shift, right? So maybe it is coming anger. You know, sometimes that can be a signal, right? Like that something is wrong and that we need to do some kind of action. You know, you hear this is like Western psychology. I've heard, you know, you hear like anger is it's productive. So we would say as Buddhists, anger isn't productive, but maybe that thing that typically is coming up that. So I'll just back up and say it's like, and I'll use a positive example because I think it's easier to tease out. Something terrible happens. We feel compassion for victims of atrocities, or, you know, I could give really recent examples in the news that are just heartbreaking. So that is a pure feeling. But because I'm here, because I'm not perfect, because I have delusion, it is worthwhile to check and unravel that thing that we call compassion and love. Where is it just purely that? And where is it hung up also with me, with the ego, with, you know, my fear, or my, you know, projecting a similarity of that person, you know, making them like me in order to have empathy for them, because kind of the world all revolves around me, right? So it's decoupling that. And so I think the same thing, and I think there would be like a wrathful kind of wisdom that would understand something negative is happening here, right? And then a normal deluded person, and that means us too, you know, I'm not gonna, you know, until we're enlightened, it's anger. But where are those two, just unraveling and decoupling those energies? That's what we're here kind of to do. And it's the controlling mode of the Lama too, right? Like you want to control your students for their benefit, right? But the first thing is you have to really be clear that it's for their benefit. And that's where, you know, and so it's interesting that this, maybe I'm making this conversation go in this direction, but I was thinking today to talk about the 8 worldly dharmas, you know, 8 worldly concerns, how they contaminate everything. And really it is on this path, this is the thing, is like decoupling. But, you know, it's interesting. We don't stop acting, you know, we don't stop being happy when, you know, if I get something that I want, I'm going to be happy. But if I can decouple the, you know, wanting what I, you know, wanting stuff and not, you know, not wanting to get things I don't like, if I can decouple those states of mind so that I get something that is lovely, instead of having the typical grasping thing that comes along, like really looking and decoupling that and then sitting with the appreciation, right? Which is like, that's something positive. Then you are enjoying, but you're not building up like a craving for something. And then on the flip side, we get something that we don't want, we get illness or something that, and then just having some kind of gentle acceptance, right? Instead of the aggressive pushing it away or, wishful thinking or, all of that stuff that we do. So
Shoving it down.
yeah. Trying to ignore our feelings, right? It's like, oh, sitting with it. And then when we can get to that place of just acceptance, gentle acceptance, we're not happy about it. You get some horrible diagnosis or something, you're not going to be happy about it, right? But you can have that gentle acceptance. And then, so I just said we won't be happy about it. And I think that's true. We're not happy to get something like that. But, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche was the master of this, transforming problems into happiness. How do you, like hardship as if it's ice cream, like developing that. And so it doesn't mean sitting and wishing to have, right? Because that if you really wanted it, if you really, if you liked it, if you developed a like for it, well, then you'd be wishing it on yourself. We're never going to do that. But it's that gentle acceptance. And then, okay, I have this. Let me use it. Let me use it to grow my own wisdom, develop my compassion further, and then let me dedicate, may I take on this illness with this mind of bodhicitta in the hopes, and so that others will not have to suffer. And then you have to say, well, how does that work? How does it work that can I really take it on so others won't have to suffer? And the answer is actually yes. Because when we have that mind that is taking on suffering for the benefit of others, that means we're taking it on to develop ourselves. Developing ourselves is what, developing all the realizations of the path is what's going to get us to that point of enlightenment. Getting to the point of enlightenment means, and even before then, having bodhicitta means we're actively serving others. So their suffering will decrease because we will be actively serving them. And then ultimately achieving enlightenment, being able to sit, it's like, here we are having this conversation, this class. But imagine if the person talking now wasn't me. Imagine it's someone who was actually fully enlightened, someone who had actually achieved all those things, somebody who had realized the great compassion bodhicitta, someone who had a direct experience of emptiness. So let me go even back. Someone who truly had renunciation for this world and understood suffering, understood the four truths. If that person is talking, we've had the experience. It feels different, right? It really helps in a different way. So I feel like, hopefully I'm being helpful. But as we develop ourselves, we really can help other living beings. And so when you say, I'm taking on this suffering so that others won't have to, so that others won't have to suffer in this way, that's how it's going to work. That's what it's going to look like. And so it's not just some brain, well, there's a lot of those, right? The brain, I want to say brainwashing, and that's not, but in a way, right? It's like the working it's lojong, it's mind training. That's why we're doing this. And they will have those results. But it's not just like a technique. It's the truth of what will happen as we practice. It's not a mind game. The lojans are that, like, they actually result in these things happening. They're not just platitude or something to play with. And the lovely other thing is that along the way, to the extent as much as we are working to practice those things, we're getting these side benefits of just being a happier person, having greater appreciation for the things that happen in our life, being able to respond more gracefully to those negative things that happen, and being there for others, makes us kind of delights to be around, right? So we get all these along the way, we get all of these other benefits, but really good. Keep your eye on the prize. Like, remember, and that's why we set the motivation in the beginning. It's why we dedicate in the end, because we're going to get all those other things that we want. But dedicating them is like, we're not cashing it in. We're living off the principle. Is that a thing? I'm not good with that, but I think that's the thing. Like, or living off the interest. I don't know. Anyway, you get my point, kind of what I'm saying. So, wow. I'm like, I was gonna do a whole thing on 8 worldly dharmas, and I'm kind of wondering, like, it's so interesting. You can rattle off what they are, and like a cursory surface level, but it's like grappling with the individual things that happen to us, and circumstances and situations that we encounter on a daily basis. Like, that's the practice. It is that grappling. It is that analytical meditation, stopping and looking at my mind. I think I said, I know I've said before, maybe I mentioned it last week. And it's related to compassion for yourself, and it's related to 8 worldly dharmas. Sometimes not only do we have to be wrathful, right? Because we want, to help, we have to cultivate that kind of energy. Again, decoupling it from like the stuff that would be negative and that would continue a negative cycle. So not only are we doing that, but also, looking at our minds and making, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of how to, just analyzing our own minds and decoupling the gunk. I guess it's as simple as that. But I had something more profound I wanted to say, and it was so profound it just it just slipped. I'm like, I had something, but that just proves that I don't really have it. Which is why I need to continue to be here, just working on it, pausing to give someone else a chance to say something or ask something. Okay. I'm trying to think of some kind of examples. I know one of the things I wanted to say was boundaries, and that was the time that I was going to make, talking about self-love. Like, so there's a selfish reason to have boundaries, right? There's also a selfless reason to have boundaries. So again, we know the laws of karma, and we know how to purify karma. So I know I've talked about this before, but the same way that we damage negative seeds, we can damage positive seeds. So regret, right, is one of the powers. Like, you regret something, and you can think of it as almost as kind of distancing yourself from it, like not being glad, not rejoicing in that action. Well, also doing something positive, doing something virtuous. If we regret that later, then we've done, we get the worst of all worlds, right? Like we've extended ourselves and then we're not happy about it. So we don't even get we don't get the investment. We don't get the karmic investment. So, being really clear, like, and again, those 8 worldly dharmas are often what will come in, and they can come in the way of like 8 worldly dharmas. I want people to think I'm a nice person. I want a good reputation. So I'm going to go and do these great things. And the activities that we're doing can be beneficial activities, but whether or not it's virtuous, if it's motivated by a desire to be thought of well, to the extent that that's the motivation, that's not virtue, right? But if you suddenly, draw a boundary and like, I can't do things anymore that I can't do happily. And it doesn't mean we don't stretch ourselves and stretch our capacities, right? It's not like being like the lazy Buddhist who never gets out of their comfort zone, but it's having that wisdom that knows that, regretting, you're not going to get the result you want. The wisdom that knows that these 8 worldly dharmas, these are the insidious things that creep around. These are the things we need to find, because these are the things that give rise to non-virtue in our body, speech, and mind. These motivations. So, maybe saying no and wishing that I had the capacity to happily do something. I can't think of a good example, but it happens in my personal life all the time. Someone will ask me for something, or I get the thought, like, oh, I would really like to do X, Y, or Z. A lot of times I'd really like to open up my home more to people. But then I know, like, okay, what's my ability to do that? I'm not saying like I never entertain, but I know a lot of people who are sort of nomadic and need a place to stay, for different periods of time. And so I do wish that I had 2 things. I wish I had greater capacity to be happy and to happily say yes to things. And I also wish that I had, like, just materially more space and everything so that I could accommodate that more happily. But sometimes I say no, because I know I work from home and I know what I need to be functional, and like that taking care of myself in that regard is practical. It's not ego driven. It's just like a very practical thing. If I'm going to doing a Buddhist practice, if I'm going to be able to do that, I need to take care of myself. I need to not stretch myself so thinly, right, that I'm kind of like having a nervous breakdown. So those boundaries, are super helpful. And then I probably said it, sorry, there's themes, and inevitably they're the things that come up for me that I feel like, oh, this is probably something that other people struggle with as well. In terms of not just in terms of boundaries, but I want to be a better person. I want to be perfect. The Buddhist path is perfection. And so I'm not that today. And sitting with that discomfort, and yet having the aspiration, which, is that's related, aspiring to be perfect, aspiring to perfect generosity, for example, all the way up to enlightenment, all of those things. Aspiring is the first step. So sitting with myself where I really am today, not trying to jump beyond where I am today, but trying to make that incremental, real movement and change that is going to be lasting and sustainable, and not snap back like a rubber band, right? So it's good to have those boundaries. And then having the wish, I've said before, it's almost like feeling hypocritical sometimes, because the aspirations are really high, and I think there is a tendency to not want to even have the, normal people will tell you, normal people, not Buddhists, will tell you, even aspiring to perfection, that's like a losing proposition. That's not even a thing. That's not even a thing. That's a loser. It's not a loser. We can and we do aspire to that. But then knowing where we are, and kind of, and never giving that up. And it feels uncomfortable a little bit, when we're not able to act, when our actions internally or externally are not aligned with our goals. Remind ourselves that, well, my goal is to be, to have perfect compassion, bodhicitta. My goal is to be, have the wisdom that completely understands reality. My goal is to be a Buddha. So I'm not that. So of course, my actions of body, speech, and mind are not going to be always aligned. They're often, usually not going to be aligned, right? But what I can do is get them in alignment, right? That's what we're practicing. Let's get them in alignment. And so sometimes, and that feeling though, is also spurs us to grow, because then, nobody likes, this is where we can make the discomfort of not getting what we don't like kind of work for us. Like, oh, I want to be better than I am. And I'm not. And it feels yucky. I feel like a hypocrite. I'm talking to you about this, and then maybe, in an hour or two, something will annoy me and I'm not showing up how I want to. But just having that experience also, like recognizing, okay, here's where I am. It makes me want to be better. And then it makes you gradually start to align more and more the actions of your body and speech and mind with that perfection. I don't know if that makes sense, but in my experience, that happens as we're practicing the path. So, be gentle with yourself, and then knowing ourselves too, because the other thing is, if we're not ever feeling like we've got these 8 worldly dharmas, if we're feeling like we're really pure, well, I would just say that's like the major, biggest red flag in the universe. That means we haven't looked. We haven't looked closely enough or examined, and I used to have kind of a simplistic mind, where I would hear something and I thought, oh, I have this perfection down. I would have maybe a thought like that, or, this one's easy for me. The actions that look like generosity, for example, might be easy, but the inward attitude as we're being generous, am I looking for some kind of an exchange? And I think how we know that it's not always obvious, but how we can know later, whether or not it was actually virtuous action, or the degree to which it was virtuous versus the degree to which it was diluted, is, what if we do something nice for someone and they just flagrantly are unappreciative? What if they're like a backstabber, back again to like the verses of, the one who harms me, the one who betrays me. How do I feel inside? How do I respond on the outside? Those are indicators, right? So indicators that, to the extent that these 8 worldly concerns are at play, right? Because if I'm freely giving, then there is no expectation, truly no expectation of being repaid, no expectation of being appreciated, none of that. It doesn't mean that it's not nice. Oh, it's nice when something is reciprocated, and we can enjoy that. But when it's not reciprocated, then understanding and remembering, well, that isn't why I did it anyway. And then, or like, ooh, now I realize was part of my motivation. How am I going to safeguard myself from actions in the future that are tainted in that way, right? So we can learn watching our mind. That's the path. We only have a little more than 10 minutes. So I want to just kind of pause and see if anything that I blah-blahed sparked any comments or questions or debate, anything.
Not almost 2 weeks, well, a week and a half ago, Venerable Katie brought up, there's a documentary called The Art of Living. And it's about a guy who was a mathematician and ended up going to Hawaii and discovered the Dharma there. And he was talking about basically Tonglen in that he said he was out swimming and he swam right into a Portuguese man of war, which are incredibly painful things. And he said he basically kind of had to, barely could get himself back up to the beach and had to kind of crawl into this little place where there weren't waves hitting it. And he sat there for several hours just in pain. And it was really interesting because he said the only thing that brought him, that he believes the only reason to live through it is because it reminded him of all the pain that people had gone through in a really equanimous way. And he was able to take the pain he was experiencing and focus that and then say, okay, now I really do want that relief for people. And so that was interesting.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, those are the moments. And you know, as we're on a spiritual path, we will all have moments like that. You know, we'll all have our own stories, or, you know, maybe not as dramatic, but we know our minds, right? So those things that we encounter, and you do actually, if that's going for refuge, right? That's going for refuge, and go for refuge, and then see the result in our own lives, right? And then move forward spiritually, like opening, you know, what happens when you think about all the suffering other beings have done. There's that side benefit, but it really kind of changes the nature of your own suffering, right? In a positive way. But more importantly, you're tapping into the goal. They're like little, I think, glimpses of like what we say, you know, result refuge, right? Go for refuge in the result, which the result would be our own enlightened self, right? It's almost like you get a glimpse of that. Oh, that's all this great compassion for all these living beings. Holding that for just a second, it's like, oh, that's what a Buddha is. That's what it's like to be them. It's kind of amazing. So, you know, hopefully we'll all have lots of big and little stories like that, where something happens to us and we transform it. You know, we use it on the path. And I think, you know, those have to be the negative things, but the good things as well. Not getting sidetracked by them, and you know, not being overly, you know, indulgent, you know, and just happily enjoying and happily accepting, you know, the good and the bad, and walking that. And it really does feel like a balanced, very middle way, not grasping and not pushing things away. And then, you know, sometimes like in that situation, he wouldn't have been able to just transform the pain, right? Or make it go away, but he was able to like transform it and use it. I want to take a couple minutes to, unless anybody has anything else or questions or anything, let's take a couple minutes to really dedicate the time. You know, I appreciate you guys so much, and just the fact that you come and help, you know, facilitate these for all sentient beings. Like, it really is that. It doesn't matter kind of, who's here. Like, you guys are here and you're putting the effort and energy forth and serving, you know, to try to make something available to other living beings. And it's quite amazing. It is very virtuous. It's like you're giving them, you're working, our time here is working to serve all living beings. And working on our own minds, being our own therapist is the start of really being able to help. And so let's take a few minutes to just quietly dedicate all of your time and energy just being here. Dedicating the beings, the suffering of living beings could be totally removed. That they could have every happiness and wisdom. That you can become a being who serves others perfectly in that way. And I wish you for the sustainability of the Dharma in this world. The long lives of all of our teachers. The swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche specifically. The health and happiness of all these beings who help us on the path, and all their wishes also be quickly fulfilled. May this world be transformed into a very beautiful field where there is peace, compassion, love, happiness for all. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I value this time together. And I hope you really do rejoice. I don't know how many of these classes you guys are helping to facilitate, but it's really, I hope you feel it really is a very special, precious offering. So thank you.